Elite universities across the United States are having an anti-Semitic meltdown. Students at Yale, NYU and Columbia have staged massive pro-Palestine protests, with hundreds being arrested by police. Sky News All-Stars Kosha Gada, Peter Stefanovic and Sophie Ellsworth take a look at how the protests spiraled out of control. Young pro-Palestine activists have taken their protests to the grounds of their own elite universities, creating mass hysteria and leading to hundreds of arrests. Sky News All-Star Kosha Gada explains the unfolding situation.
Kosha, what's going on at Columbia University? I mean, it has gone around the world. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, human rights activist, we know her well. She's put a post out on X. She says, for a second, imagine that black students at Columbia were taunted, go back to Africa. Or imagine that a gay student was surrounded by homophobic protesters and hit with a stick at Yale. But that's what's happening to Jews, isn't it?
It is. It's quite a stunning picture. I think Columbia has become sort of ground zero for this, but it's spreading out elsewhere at Yale, at NYU, etc. There's basically about 200 protesters that have formed this encampment at Columbia outside the West Lawn. About half of them, 108 of them, were arrested for trespassing without incident, and 2 of them for obstruction of government administration, one of whom actually is the daughter of sitting Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. So that sort of, makes this issue spill out into the political arena even further. In terms of why it's happening, I mean, we've talked about this before, that there's so many dynamics that are almost like a petri dish at these universities over there, where there's the impact of immigration and importing some of these allegiances that are spilling out. There's sort of this coddling culture that's happened at these universities. There's the way protests, I think, were amplified and supported during the summer riots with BLM. I think that culture is carrying over, and they just have weak leadership at the top of the university, and all those things put together is leading to some pretty stunning and outrageous stuff that we're seeing.
Sky News commentator Greg Sheridan agrees, saying the protests are vile, anti-Semitic and reflect the breakdown of civility in the United States.
Let's go now to Greg Sheridan, foreign editor at The Australian, who joins us every week. Greg, great to see you. What do you make of these Ivy League university protests really continuing in a big way, certainly at Columbia University in New York, the pro-Palestinian protests, and causing quite a stir?
Well, Kieran, I think this is a very serious situation for America. It's part of the breakdown of civility and basic willingness to abide by the law in America. It's a complex situation. There are non-student agitators getting involved and making the violence worse. But what you've got now in campuses across America is a situation of vile anti-Semitic pogroms which are reminiscent of Europe in the 19th century. Jews have been advised by their own communal organisations to stay home from Columbia University because it's not safe for them. So it's one thing for some students to rally and indicate their solidarity with Palestinians or whatever. Nobody could object to that. But these demonstrations have been violent. They have disrupted the universities. Of course, that's kind of routine. But also they have been extremely threatening and intimidating to Jewish students and faculty. And at last, the university administrators have called in the police. This is setting up as the biggest confrontation on campus since the Vietnam War. And the spite and the hatred and the sectarian intolerance of the demonstrators against Jews, not just critical of Israel, even though I think their criticism of Israel is wildly unbalanced and extreme. I think it's a very disturbing moment for America.
The protests and threats of violence have become so bad that administrators have been forced to shift classes online, says Sky News All-Star Peter Stefanovic.
Ivy League universities in the US are trying to calm anti-Israel protests. Columbia University's president is shifting classes online and adding more security to the campus as Jewish students fear for their safety. At the same time, residents in Israel are trying to celebrate the Day of Freedom while remembering their loved ones.
Anti-Israel protests continue on Ivy League campuses across the country. The president of Columbia University shifting to all virtual classes, releasing a statement writing in part, the decibel of our disagreements has only increased in recent days. We need a reset. Jewish students on campus say they just don't feel safe. A rabbi at the Ivy League school telling students to head home.
People have been saying for a while now that they don't feel safe, and a lot of that had to do with the rhetoric. But I want to be clear right now, this has now gotten into physical safety. I no longer feel physically safe.
The fact that this is spreading is not surprising to me.
At Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, police removing protesters from encampments on campus, leading to arrests. These protests come as Jewish students prepare to celebrate Passover, a major Jewish holiday focused on freedom. And in Israel, some Israelis finding it hard to celebrate. One of the communities hardest hit by Hamas attacks on October 7th, setting a communal table in Tel Aviv. That table has empty seats representing those who have been killed, taken hostage, or are still fighting.
We're a broken community, but with the hope to continue.
Now, more than 6 months after those attacks, the focus remains on getting the hostages home.
We are holding on to the hope that our hostages will return.
And here in Columbia's campus in New York City, the university will add more security measures.
Throughout the mayhem, university administrators have come under fire for failing to publicly condemn the anti-Semitic behaviour, reveals Sky News All-Star Sophie Ellsworth.
Differently. We've seen some shocking footage out of Columbia University in the US. Here is a Jewish professor being barred from his own campus.
Back up, please. My card has been deactivated? Why? Can you back up, please? Wait. Whoa. Everybody, my card has been deactivated. This is Cass Holloway, the COO. This is Gerald Lewis. They were in the meeting where I asked them if Hamas is a terror organization, and they couldn't say. I am a professor here. I have every right to be everywhere on campus. You cannot let people that support Hamas on campus and me, a professor, not go on campus. Let me in now.
So if the professor makes a really good point here, he should be able to go anywhere on campus. It's not a crime to be Jewish. What happens next here? Who's taking responsibility for this?
Well, this is the problem, Caroline, with universities across the world. We've seen many people at these universities become activists. And I think it's really concerning, like you say, that he can't just go about his business without being attacked by this. And I think it's a sad state of affairs when our universities can't all live in harmony and operate in harmony and carry on like that. And I think there's really got to be a clamping down on it. But this is a pretty sad state of affairs, unfortunately, Caroline.
And even the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has weighed in with a diplomatic response, trying not to offend either side.
Mr. President, what's your message to the protesters? Do you condemn the anti-Semitic protests on college campuses?
I condemn the anti-Semitic protests. That's why I've set up a program to deal with that. I also condemn those who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians and how they're being.
Should the Columbia University president resign?
Presidential candidate Donald Trump was a lot more blunt in his condemnation of the protests, calling them a disgrace.
What's going on at the college level and the colleges, Columbia, NYU, and others, is a disgrace, and it's really on Biden. He has the wrong signal. He's got the wrong tone. He's got the wrong words. He doesn't know who he's backing, and it's a mess. And if this were me, he'd be after me. He'd be after me so much, but they're trying to give him a pass. And what's going on is a disgrace to our country, and it's all Biden's fault, and everybody knows it. He's got no message. He's got no compassion. He doesn't know what he's doing. He can't put two sentences together, frankly. He is the worst president in the history of our country. And again, what's going on is a disgrace.
And it seems large and powerful donors are also unhappy with the situation at these universities, with one billionaire pulling his funding from Columbia.
And a bunch of other people who I wouldn't mind sending off to Rwanda are these bloody pro-Palestinian protesters who keep carrying on. And we told you earlier in the week about the ones at Columbia University in New York. They have continued their rampage against that university, staging their camp in at the front on the uni grounds. They've set up their tents, they're staying there, and they are intent on not moving. We showed you some of the vision the other night of the out-and-out threats of violence, protesters basically encouraging Israeli and Jewish students who showed up to counter protests that they should essentially be killed. So you can understand why some people may have a problem with this, including Robert Kraft, who is a major donor, has been a major donor to Columbia University, was a student of Columbia University himself, of course, of Kraft food fame. He says that this mob is effing crazy, as you can see there on the screen, and that he is going to be withdrawing any further donations. And this is exactly what we need to see. We need to see people stand up and put their money where their mouth is, or more to the point, remove their money, because the only thing left that can talk on this is money, because we know that the universities themselves, particularly the Ivy League universities in the US and certainly universities here in Australia, including the University of Melbourne, have done nothing to stem the rise of anti-Semitism. In fact, they seemingly support Hamas.
Comedian Alex Stein makes the observation that the pro-Palestine protests are much more tense than other protests, necessitating harsher measures from police.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, there's just such a fantastic kind of weenie lameness about this, because in some of these protests I see them and they've actually, they have to read off their phone, Free Palestine, because our educators haven't given them even the short-term memory to be able to memorize something like that.
I know. I mean, it's a nursery rhyme, and they can't even remember it. So, I mean, just think about that. They're looking at their phone, trembling. But, on a serious note, I am a comedian, but when I go to these rallies, I notice from BLM to the transgender youth rallies, the Palestinian rallies, they're a lot more tense. And that one was not a really good example of how tense they get. But if you're in New York, they had to create the SRG, Strategic Response Group. And that's a sector of the NYPD that is just for stopping protesters, because they're sick of it. They're sick of what they're doing and shutting down streets, blocking roads when people are trying to get into work. So, it's kind of sad that a few bad apples can spoil the bunch. And I wouldn't be surprised if they start creating legislation against protests, and then we lose some of our constitutional rights here in America.